Cool. Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching the session with me on teaching your instrument. My name is Mark Robinson, and I've been teaching since I was 15. I'm 35 now, so that makes it 20 years. Gosh, that makes me sound old. But during that time, I've taught all different types of students, from 4-year-olds coming in with their first guitar and their parents sitting in the room as well, to adults who had been playing before and wanted to get better at their technique, to teenagers who really wanted to learn shred guitar, and people who had retired who had a bit more time on their hands and wanted to play their favorite songs. I guess that pretty much covers the first 5 or 6 years of my teaching career, and then after that I set up a company called Rocksteady Music School. We started in the community centre in Alton, teaching evening lessons there to people of all sorts of different ages. We did drums and guitar and bass, singing, keyboard and band sessions, and that was a lot of fun, and that evolved into us teaching in schools as well. And we ended up specialising in teaching younger children, so age 5 to 11, primary schools. And we're now teaching in around 1,500 primary schools across the UK. And before February this year, when that which shall not be mentioned happened, we were teaching over 30,000 children every week. So I now have a company of 200 people, and around 150 of those are teachers, full-time teachers of drums, guitar, keyboard, singing and bass. And teaching has been a wonderful, wonderful part of my music career. It hasn't been the only thing that I've done, but it's probably been the most fulfilling thing that I've done. I have played original music too, but if we count what I'm calling my music career for now as things that have paid me enough to be able to pay the bills and eat food and things like that that are important, it's been divided between either teaching or playing at people's weddings and at corporate functions and things like that. And in the early part of my career, I probably made the majority of my income from playing gigs, and then around about when I was about 25, I decided to just go wholeheartedly into the teaching side of things, and to try and make Rocksteady work. So because I've done a lot of teaching myself, and because I employ a lot of teachers, I've seen a lot of what works and what doesn't in teaching, and I can normally very quickly tell whether somebody is suitable for teaching as a sustainable career path. And the most important thing to ask yourself is, why do you want to teach? Now, I would say if it has something to do with passion for your instrument, that's a good start. But if it's the first answer that came to your head, consider as well whether it's got anything to do with wanting to be around people all the time and sharing that knowledge with other people, whether that's children, adults. You can picture whichever age group you'd like to teach. But teaching really is all about the person you're teaching. It's maybe 20% the instrument or the subject you're teaching if you're teaching a different subject, and 80% the people. I remember a music teacher asking me when I was teaching music at a school as well, they asked, what do you teach? And I said, guitar. And they said, no, that's wrong, you teach children. And there's something that was quite profound about that, but also very true. You have to, certainly if you're going to teach children, you have to want to go through all the challenges involved in managing the energy of a child who's excited and possibly bouncing off the walls, or even a child who might want to do something else other than being in the lesson. If you're teaching an adult, you have to really want to understand why it is they want to be learning the instrument, what they want to get out of it, and really help them on their journey. So in both those cases, it's about the other person or the other group of people that you're working with, not so much about the instrument itself. So what we're going to do today, if you're still with me and you're thinking that's you're also very interested in other people and you like spending time with other people, and perhaps you like inspiring other people as well, or if you haven't don't feel you've inspired other people yet, perhaps you like the idea of inspiring people, that would be a good start. What we're going to go over today is just some simple questions about the who's, why's, what's, how's, when's and where's of teaching. And then we're going to do a bit at the end about making teaching your career, either part-time, part of your career, if you want your music career to be more of a portfolio career where you're doing lots of playing as well. And I would recommend that, unless you're totally passionate about teaching right out the gate and you've already made up your mind that's the thing you want to do. Most of us didn't start playing our instruments thinking, do you know what, if we tried really hard, one day we might be able to become a teacher. Most of us picked up our instruments because we wanted to play in bands or play solo or whatever it is, but we wanted to play gigs for other people. So make sure you include a healthy dose of that, because it that really helps to keep the passion for what you're doing alive. So we'll talk about how to make teaching part of your career, or how to make it all of your career if you want to. If you've got any questions along the way, just drop them in the chat, and we'll answer them as we go, or save them up and answer them at the end, depending on how it fits into things. But any questions, do ask them in the chat. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the who of teaching. Now, the who is all about who you are teaching. Now, you can obviously notice quite a lot of different things about a person. One of the most obvious ones to start with, we've already talked about it, is how old they are. It's incredibly different teaching a 10-year-old from teaching a 15-year-old, and very different teaching a 15-year-old from teaching a 65-year-old. I would say that once children get below the age of 8, it becomes quite a specialist skill. And if you're anything like me, and most people I know, your first few attempts, if you haven't got any guidance, teaching very young children will be a bit of a car crash. But that's okay. They don't know what they're supposed to be learning either. So, it's an experience for everybody. But that's one of the first things to notice is how old are they, and think about what style of teaching you're going to have to do, or what style of learning would they benefit from. And then it gets more interesting than that. So if they're a little bit older, you can ask yourself and ask them what sort of music they're into, what bands do they like listening to, what artists do they like listening to, and that'll give you a really good idea of what to base your lessons around. If they're really young, then often they're not sure, but you can ask them about what songs they've heard on the radio recently, or what songs do their parents play at home. They'll have some ideas about those things. They just don't know whether they like it or not yet, usually. But then also, as you start to teach them, try and notice other things about them and about their individual psychology. What do they respond to? Do they respond to you challenging them, saying, I've got a challenge for you today? Some students will, some won't. Some will do completely the opposite and shut down and look confused at you, and some will respond really well if you try and push them and come up with challenges. Do they want to be there because they're focused on their instrument and they want to become the best at it, or they really want to learn this song or what have you? Or do they actually just quite like hanging out with you? Because that's probably at least half of the students I've ever taught are also there because they enjoy hanging out with a musician who knows what they're talking about, and they're learning from you as a role model, as a human, just as much as they're learning from you as somebody who's brilliant on drums or something like that. So try to notice those things. Do they want to talk a lot and lead the lesson? In which case you're going to teach differently to if they want you to tell them what to do. Do they need very precise instructions? Do they need to go over things lots of times before they'll try it? Or are they just going to jump in and try it straight away? All of these different things matter a lot. I could talk just about that. In fact, I nearly wrote a book about that once, and the template of it was 70 pages before I thought, I'm getting a little bit too specialist and in-depth here, and about 5 people are going to read it. But you can get a long way just by trying to notice things about your students and how they're going to respond. If you notice that I haven't talked about the instrument and how you're going to teach it yet, it's because, as we said at the beginning, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is who you're teaching and developing a strong teaching relationship with that person. So after you've figured out who it is you're teaching, the next thing to figure out is why they want to learn. And again, this can be for all sorts of different reasons. When I did a bunch of research early on in the days of Rocksteady Music School, we found that 9 out of 10 children who wanted to learn took up an instrument because they wanted to impress their friends. As adults, we sometimes like to think that we couldn't possibly be so shallow. But for those of us who started playing instruments as a kid, that memory isn't perfect, is it? But it's probably something like that. And the other answer, the 1 in 10, was because they really liked the sounds that the bands were making, and they just wanted to be able to play those songs. They didn't care if anybody else ever heard them play it or not. But there could be, that's on a sort of very broad level. There could be a whole variety of nuanced reasons. I wouldn't, just come right out and go, so why do you want to play them? Why do you want to take up the instrument? Because that sounds like you're grilling them, and they might, be a bit defensive. But asking, what got you interested in guitar, or what got you interested in keyboard, or whichever instrument it is you're playing, or when did you know that you wanted to be a guitar player? When did you know that you wanted to be a singer? Those are really good questions, because they'll probably tell you a story about the first time they got inspired by a band or by an artist somewhere. I can remember mine as clear as day. It was seeing Axl Rose sing Bohemian Rhapsody burst in on the end of a performance. I think he was doing it with Elton John. I was probably about 5 years old or 6 years old at the time. watching TV in my parents' living room. I was like, I want to play in a band. And then I watched the rest of the concert and realized I wanted to be the guitar player. It was like, that's just what I want to do. So, you know, and then the early days of me learning to play were just me going through Guns N' Roses' back catalogue, learning everything that I could. And, you know, if you know that as a teacher, what it is that your students are really into, that's really valuable. What was the spark that made them want to learn in the first place? Because what you want to do, just call it a spark, then you could also call it a seed. You want to take that seed and water it and nurture it, because, you know, it can be for all sorts of different reasons. It could be because of a more famous band they've seen. It could be because their friends playing and they also want to be able to do what their friends doing. It could be because they want to be able to jam along with an older sibling or their mum or something like that. So, you know, find out what it is and use that that's where kind of all the potential energy is for their progression. So it's your job as a teacher to take that potential energy and help craft an experience out of it, to help them with their journey, because those are the things that are really going to help when things get a little bit difficult, as they always do when we're learning any skill and when we're progressing. Whatever all of us are doing in life at the moment, there's stuff that we're trying to get better at, and you know, there'll be bits that are hard, but if you kind of remember why we're doing it in the first place, it often gives us the motivation to get through. So it's your job to find that out for your student and help craft a journey for them that is very much centered in that why they wanted to do it in the first place. But I will say it again, don't just ask them, why did you want to do this? Because you'll get a defensive answer. Ask them, when did they know that they wanted to play the guitar? And you will find in some cases, especially with children, it'll be because my dad told me to, or when my dad said he wanted me to learn this. And then you've got a slightly different challenge on your hands. But I'll maybe go into that at the end if there's any questions about that one. So once you've you've focused, and it's not like you do all these in a sequential step-by-step order, it's just focus mainly on who you're teaching, focus secondarily on why they want to learn, and then the third thing that you're going to focus on in your priority order is what they want to learn. In the first lesson, you're going to go through all of these within kind of 5 minutes to figure out. So if you've just figured out why they want to learn and they can point to a specific song, the answer to what they want to learn, what you're going to teach them, is probably that specific song. If they give you a range of different things, pick whatever's most suitable for the level they're at. I've always believed in teaching students through whatever it is they want to learn. To me, it's never really mattered. I've found ways of simplifying even really ridiculously hard stuff to make it simple, or teaching them small parts of it, or if they're younger children who couldn't tell you what you want to learn, they want to learn, give them a few options. Say, here's 2 different songs, which one do you like best? And they'll be really happy with that because they've still had an element of choice. But I've always believed in student-led learning. So, I've never walked around with a curriculum saying, here's all the things that you need to learn. I do have in the back of my mind a structure, if you like, of how you build one skill on another, and I always kind of have a map of where the student is and where the gaps are and things like that. So I'm kind of filling that in as I go, and then we can talk about this as the journey progresses. But certainly to start with, what you want to do is take that seed, water it right away, or try and take advantage of that spark, and try and get the fire going. And you do that by trying to connect what you teach them to why they wanted to learn in the first place as quickly as possible. So if it's Metallica, For Whom the Bell Tolls, that got them interested, see if you can figure out a version of doing that. you know, quite simply and quickly. Just going through different instruments in my head, as I said, there's bits on the drums that you could absolutely do in the first lesson. Guitars, you'd have to be a little bit creative. Probably not going to get any keyboard players coming to you inspired by For Whom the Bell Tolls, but you know, you get the idea. You want to capitalize on that. So once you've figured out what you're going to be teaching them, you've been thinking about that. The next bit is how you're going to teach them, and you've got two kind of different things that you want to be thinking about here. How you're going to teach them, you've got to think about the level that they're at. So if they're a brand new beginner and, you know, they've literally never held a guitar before, for example, you're going to have to teach them the basics of being able to fret a note and being able to pick a note, whether that's with fingers or a plectrum or however you're going to do it. And when you're teaching these techniques, you want to think about how to do it in a way that they can do it now, but it's not going to disadvantage them later on. So they haven't learned it in a way where they're not going to be able to advance at a certain point in their playing because they got stuck, because they're, for example, on guitar using all downstrokes, or all upstrokes would be far worse, wouldn't it? If you were just learning, because this does happen, you know, I've seen people who've learned just from picking upstrokes on the guitar. And then other than a few very niche kind of surf style guitar things, it's not really going to be served by that. So when they're doing technique, think about that. You know, you will know, if you're considering teaching, you will be at a certain level, I'm sure, where you can play a lot of stuff. Look at your technique and think, how can I get it as close to that as I can while still making it possible for them. If you were going to teach For Whom the Bell Tolls on guitar, to start with, you wouldn't teach the power chords. You would just be teaching single notes, and you'd be using that to teach them to fret single notes. Again, think about their fretting journey and how's that going to go on into the future. You know, they might only be able to do it with one finger to start with, but you'll be thinking about, how can I get multiple fingers used here and get that concept baked in reasonably early, so that I'm not going to disadvantage them, whilst still setting them appropriate challenges for where they're at right now. So I've got two daughters. One is 4 and one is 5 months old right now. So the one who's 5 months old, at that age, they're already understanding bits and pieces of language. Instead of saying to her name's Freya, instead of saying to her, I'm going to get your milk, Freya, that's too many words for her to understand, I point at her and say Freya and make contact. So I do that a lot, so she's getting the idea her name's Freya. And then I say milk, and I do the sign for milk. Now, Freya milk is not a sentence that any of us would use ever as adults, but it's just enough information from the sentence that we would use as adults eventually to work for her right now. And it's the same when you're teaching. You might see a much higher fidelity version of whatever it is you're teaching. You want to figure out just enough information from it to make it sound like the song, and to make it playable for them, so it's an appropriate level of challenge at whatever stage they're at. And that's the method that Rocksteady's founded on, because we teach lots of younger children, and you know, have to teach different instruments at the same time and things like that. We take any song and, you know, take it down to its bare bones, its most important bits, and then you can build up and fill out more information as you go from there. So that's I've talked about quite a lot of different things there. perhaps I know this is being recorded, so watch it again and make notes or ask questions if you've got any questions about that. So those are the two things to consider, really. We've talked about both, and the level that they're at, and setting an appropriate challenge, coming up with an appropriate version of what they want to learn, the song they want to learn for them at that time, and then the technique. Just try not to limit them with it. So the technique has to be not necessarily perfect, but always be thinking about the next steps and how you're going to take it towards something that's going to serve them for a long time. So cool, we've talked about the main things at quite a high conceptual level. I haven't sort of gone down into any detail because I know there'll be different people watching this who are drummers or guitar players or, all sorts of different kind of stages and interests in teaching. So it's been at quite a high conceptual level, but we've talked about making sure you understand who your student is primarily and why they want to learn, then figuring out what they want to learn, and then you figure out how you're going to teach them that. Okay, so that's the basics of what happens in a lesson. And the other thing to figure out, because it's actually not trivial, is when and where these lessons are going to take place. Obviously, online lessons, certainly this year, have taken off massively. It used to be all lessons took place over Skype. Now there's a whole range of different mediums over which lessons can take place. And you can do lessons in different ways. I mean, you don't even actually, and this could suit some people who, maybe are a bit more about their instrument and a bit less about teaching another person. You could even be doing your lessons as a series of YouTube videos or something like that. I think you still got to be thinking about your audience as people and how they're going to learn from what you're saying. But there's a whole, range of different online platforms that you can be teaching on. And then that you can go to your students' houses to teach. I did that for a bit, but it turned out I was spending a lot of time traveling and sitting in traffic. I did that a little bit while I was at uni, and it only lasted a couple of months. You can have students coming over to your place if it's, not COVID times. You can go and teach at a music school. You can, or you could go and work in a school, and these are all incredibly different environments. One of the things that really inspired me to get going with Rocksteady in schools more was that I was a very, confident and competent guitar teacher, teaching out of my parents' front room as it was at the time. All my students were doing quite well. I taught for another music school for a bit, and I wasn't quite as competent in that environment because I didn't have the same setup around me. But I was still getting good results for the students, and they sent me to teach in a couple of primary schools, and it was totally different. It was really, really hard. So part of my whole mission with Rocksteady was about figuring out how to do that really, really well, and creating a different model for doing it. The kids all learn to play in bands rather than individual instruments, which works a lot better. But they're all very different environments. So have a think about what would suit you, and this is probably quite important if it's going to be part of your career, the when part as well. So I did a lot of years teaching evenings and then gigging weekends, which was great because I guess my social circle largely came from my band and the gigging at the weekends. But it is worth noting you'll have many friends who won't be gigging musicians, and all the time that they're not at work, you'll be either teaching or gigging. Which, I mean, it's not as bad as everybody makes out before you go and do it. I remember when I was at school, everybody, whenever I said I wanted to be a musician as a career. It's like, oh, you'll be working such antisocial hours. It was like, yeah, but that's what I want to do. So that's what I'm going to enjoy doing. So that doesn't even make any sense. So don't worry about that too much. But then if you're teaching in schools, you're teaching during the days and you've got evenings free for band practices and things like that. But so thinking about that side of things as well. But I would recommend, if teaching something you're interested in, the first thing to do is just try and find some people local to you who you can teach, or find people who are in a community, an online community that you're a part of, that want lessons. And the way to do that, especially if you're on the online community side of things, isn't just to start saying, I'm available for lessons, they cost this much, who wants to do it? Because that's not really how it works. You've got to try and deliver value to that community for quite a while first, until everybody in the community knows and likes you. And then at that point, you can offer your services as lessons. You never just go straight out and say it. And if it's finding somebody local to you, it's for me, my first student was my mum. One of my mum's friends, her child was like 6-7 years younger than me and wanted to learn guitar, so I started teaching him. Then my dad's friend from work had a child who was, again, I was like 16 and they were just a few years younger than me, but they wanted to learn to play, so I taught them. And I built up a roster of students that paid my way through college without having to work in a supermarket for many hours, which was nice. And then I went to university and did the same thing, built up a roster of students. So that was a little bit harder because that was like starting from scratch. But you just find some people who want to learn, try to teach them, see if you like it, see if they like it. If both of those things happen, then good. Start thinking about the next steps of how to build your roster of students, or whether you might like to get a job teaching in a school. If you want to teach in schools, there's a few different ways to do that. If it's a secondary school you want to teach in, secondary schools are quite nice from if you're passionate about your instrument, teaching it perspective, because the kids at that age are just a bit more able to pick things up more quickly, more dexterous, will be able to progress at a much faster pace, and will probably share a passion for music and have specific bands they're into and stuff like that. If you want to teach in a secondary school, it's often about getting a job directly with that secondary school. So letting all the secondary schools in your area know that you want to teach there, and that you're available is good, and you don't just do it once. You have to find ways of keeping in touch. And usually, jobs only appear at secondary schools when the existing teacher moves on. So, and they often find the next teacher as well. So finding a way to know the teacher at those schools is a good idea, because then, if you're in with them, then they can recommend you. So that's how I would think about secondary schools. Primary schools, you could either apply to the local kind of music hubs, they're called now. They used to be called councils, but now they're called music hubs, for jobs. They go there sometimes. There's different independent teaching services that go into those schools as well. Could always apply for a job at Rocksteady Music School. I can recommend that one, but I am biased. That's fun because you teach kids in a whole band situation. You get to teach all the different instruments and actually get really young kids to sound awesome in bands, which I obviously love doing because I've built this stage of my career around making that happen a lot. But so the primary school age group's a little bit different. You probably end up doing a mixture if you go into schools. If you're looking at teaching adults, Honestly, I don't know at the moment how you do that. If I was going to do that right now, see, when I last wanted to teach adults, it was like 15 years ago, and the world's changed a lot in 15 years. I imagine a lot of the people I'm talking to are 15 years old, potentially, or just a bit older. And back then, it was like you go around your local town and the music studios and stuff like that and plaster them with posters and leave these little business cards everywhere. That might still work, I don't know. But the other thing that I do, I just find communities that were into the same sort of music that I'm into online, and into for me it would be like the more technical side of guitar playing. I'd join all those communities, try and add value to them, do lots of free YouTube videos and that sort of thing, and then let people know that I was available for lessons and start picking up some students from there. That's probably the direction I'll go if I was more interested in teaching adults right now. So I think those are kind of the three main groups. There's teaching in schools, primary, secondary, that. Teaching at college as well, that's kind of very similar to teaching at a secondary school. You'd want to know who the existing guitar teacher at the college was. And because of just the way geography works, you'd end up teaching in a mixture. You probably wouldn't end up teaching only in colleges, or you'd be driving a long way to different places each day. So how to make teaching part of your career? Like I said at the beginning, I think you want to make sure that you've got time for doing live playing in some way, shape or form, whether that's gigging with your own originals band, whether that's playing in a covers band to make more money, however you're doing it. I think for most people, you want to make sure you've got a good chunk of time for that. And so for many, many years, I didn't teach past Friday mornings. I always had Friday afternoons off so I could get to gigs. And then I would teach privately on Saturday mornings sometimes, but always made sure I had time to get to gigs on Saturday evening as well. Because I played in, kind of professional function bands, that scene tends to be very anti-rehearsing. So I think we did like 4 days of rehearsal when we started the band, and then that was it for like a couple of years, and then you do another few days, and then you just kind of trust each other to be able to learn the songs, and then you play them on gigs and eventually and slowly get better at them, but you expected to be able to do them to a good enough standard straight away. So we didn't need too much time for rehearsing. But if you're in a band that needs a lot of time for writing and recording and rehearsing, that's cool. Just know when you're going to do it. Or if you're a solo artist and you need to do that, just schedule out the time in the week when you're going to do that, if it's on a Tuesday or a Friday or whenever it is, and then you've got your other days available for teaching. In terms of making it into a viable career, because I know this is often something that if you're haven't started your career yet, let's say you're at college or something like that, this is something that parents are always very interested in, is like how are you going to make money out of it. I mean, you can definitely make a decent living from doing lots of teaching. Just work out how much it is you want to earn in a month or a year, or how much you'd need to pay rent on wherever you're going to live, and how much you need for food and stuff like that. Work out how much you're charging an hour. If you're unsure what to charge for your time an hour, if you're doing it solo, then I'd have a look at whatever the Musicians Union is recommending as hourly rates, and then take it down a bit, because they always say it's more than the market is usually willing to pay. But take it down a bit from there, find out what other people are charging for lessons. If you're going to work for a music school, they'll have a set rate that they pay for that sort of thing. But just work out how much teaching you need to do. work out how many students you need, and then build towards that. If you've got income coming in from gigs and stuff like that as well, again, just work out how many gigs you need to be doing at what sort of price, and then figure out a way to get there. Cool. So that's all the things that I had to cover. So in summary, if you want to get into teaching, make sure you're doing it because you really want to spend time with people and helping them to learn music. That's got to be at least 80% of it. 20%, I'd be happy for that to be about the instrument itself, but 80% of it needs to be about wanting to spend time with people. And then figure out why they wanted to learn in the first place, and then craft a journey around that, around whatever their why is really important. Cool. So we've got a question. How would you deal with a student that you're not sure has the right abilities, and is it ever right to advise that it may not be their thing? I'd say no, it's not ever right to advise that, because it's the right abilities for what, really? You know, I've taught students before who have spent 5 years unable to play anything in time, and have been unaware, seemingly completely unaware of what playing in time is. Who one day clicked, and then it just worked out for them from then on. And the reason I think they kept going and it one day clicked was they just were that passionate about playing guitar. You know, and if I'd made a judgment really early on that they, you know, didn't have the right abilities to play guitar, then they wouldn't have got all the joy from it. And you know, learning music, a bit like lots of other things, can be about so many things. It's not necessarily about being good at it. It's about the feeling that it gives us. I'm not the best guitar player in the world, but I get a lot from playing guitar. And my other hobby, people find it strange that this is a hobby, but it is running in the mountains. I go and do like really long distance mountain races, go to Wales and Scotland and places like that. Now, in the last one that I did, I'm always in the back half of finishers, right? And the last one that I did, I think I came like 100th out of 120 people or something, right? So I'm not very good at it compared to some of the other people who do it, but I love it. And I get so much from it, and I'd be devastated if somebody said, you don't have the right abilities to do this, so you can't do it. So no, I think it's always a good idea to just encourage anybody who's passionate about playing the instrument, and help them get to the next step, whatever that might be, and however long that takes. Cool. So Motion Blur Production says, I'm 16 and I want to teach guitar. How do I avoid coming across as unprofessional and prove that I am serious, considering my age? Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that was a concern that I definitely had when I was a young guitar teacher as well. And, you know, I think a lot of people, strangely enough, when I say the word professional, I think of somebody in a suit and a tie. And anybody who's ever come for an interview for Rocksteady in a suit or a tie has typically struggled, actually, to get the job. Not because they're wearing a suit or a tie, but because they have sort of an idea that it's about, you know, being false or being in some way very formal or something like that. I think what most people want from a teacher is somebody who has the ability to understand them. Somebody who has the ability to connect with them on the things that they're interested in. Somebody who's passionate is really important, and somebody who will share that passion and enthuse the students. So I think those are all the most important things, and you can certainly do those at 16 just as well as you can any other age. So yeah, I wouldn't let anything hold you back. The other thing that I remember when I first got a job at a music school, right, I was 17, and I thought I took in like 4 different guitars to my first lesson there, because I thought I might get somebody who's into jazz, so I need to take a guitar that can do that, and if I get an acoustic player, I need an acoustic, and I'll take the Strat in case anybody's into blues. And I was thinking around the same things. I was really, and I made sure I had a shave, which is something that you can see I don't bother with anymore, before I went there. And I had my file and made sure I put on a shirt and all of those things. And my students on the first day, I actually only had one student, and he was maybe 14, so a couple of years younger than me. He'd been learning for a couple of years, and was trying to still figure out how to play power chords. His last guitar teacher hadn't managed to help him too much with that, and he was playing Rainbow Since You've Been Gone, because that's what his last teacher was working on with him. And he didn't know what a pick was, and that was the only student I had that night. So we can worry a lot about all this stuff and try and be over prepared, but at some point I think just try and do it, try and be super friendly, try and make a connection with the students that you've got. Cool. Yeah, as Catherine at Lounge Bar is saying, we've got 5 minutes left. Thank you very much to Mark. You're very welcome. Please tell people where they can find Rocksteady information and where they can find more resources to further their research. Rocksteady information is rocksteadymusicschool.com. Yeah, we're a national company who teach in primary schools all around the UK and teach the kids to play in bands. Further resources into teaching. I wrote a book about it. That's called Learn to Play the Rocksteady Way. You can find that on Amazon. And I wrote that book primarily for people who are interested in teaching at Rocksteady, who might not have known that yet, to find out a bit more about our teaching ethos and why we do the things the way that we do it. But there's absolutely tons of books on teaching out there. I think a lot of them are more traditional, which is more based on there is a right way to play the instrument, and it's more about the instrument than the students. I haven't seen too much that's focused on the students. I've kind of learned a lot about that by just doing it for tens of thousands of hours now. But I'm sure you can find things if you go out and look, but do try and get some experience as well, because that's always the most valuable teacher. Cool. Unless there's any more questions, I think we're probably good. Is that right? I'm waiting for some sort of indication.